Beneath the clouds, where every second could decide fate, scenes unfolded that rarely entered the history books. High above Europe, a pilot faced not only his enemy, but also his own limits. That man was Francis Gabreski. For some, he was a symbol of courage. For others, an example of boldness that bordered on recklessness. He rose into danger again and again, as if searching for something others feared to imagine. His triumphs brought fame, yet behind each victory lay a price the newspapers never revealed. Why did his greatest success turn into an unexpected downfall? What happened on the day when he became a prisoner after record victories? And how did it come to pass that the enemies he once fought would later sit with him at the same table? The answers unfold in this story, where truth shines brighter than legend. Don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe. You are not here by accident. Neighbors said the boy looked too serious. In the small Pennsylvania town where Francis Stanley Gabreski grew up, boys played baseball and swam in creeks. Francis stood apart, staring skyward with an intensity that unsettled adults. His parents, Polish immigrants, heard in that silence the restlessness they had felt crossing an ocean. At home, Polish mixed with English, and Sunday dinners carried tales of cavalry charges and lost estates. His father came home from the steel mill with hands blackened by grease, yet bearing the posture of a man who remembered owning land. That pride Francis absorbed like air. Respect, his father taught, is earned. Excellence was expected in chores, schoolwork, even posture. Teachers saw a quiet, dutiful student who drifted into daydreams. They did not know his thoughts were climbing into clouds that looked firm enough to walk on. At St. Stanislaus Church, Mass in Polish and Latin planted lessons of duty, sacrifice, and a heritage scarred by occupation. Such words made certain fights feel larger than self. Francis kept to himself, wandering forests and streams, returning with the same thoughtful gaze. Asked what he did, he said only, thinking. The depression pinched the family, but want was not new. He watched his father take double shifts, his mother patch clothes past endurance. From them he learned persistence, restraint, and the conviction that strength, not complaint, was a passport in America. And always, above the mill smoke and church bells, the sky waited, promising a place where the serious boy might finally belong. As a youth, he already sensed that ordinary life was not meant for him. High school brought new challenges and the first real glimpse of his future path. Francis discovered that physical coordination came naturally to him. His hands seemed to know instinctively how mechanical things worked, his reflexes responding faster than conscious thought. While classmates struggled with shop class projects, Francis completed complex assemblies with an ease that amazed teachers. Aviation magazines began appearing in his room, their pages worn from repeated study. He memorized aircraft specifications, performance data, and pilot accounts with the dedication of a scholar. His parents initially viewed this interest as typical teenage fascination, but Francis's focus proved deeper and more persistent than casual hobby. He spoke of flying with the certainty of someone describing their inevitable destiny. The local airport became his unofficial second home. Francis would ride his bicycle there after school, watching mechanics service aircraft and pilots prepare for flights. He volunteered for any task that brought him closer to the machines, cleaning hangars, organizing tools, even sweeping runways. The older men tolerated his presence, occasionally answering questions about engine maintenance or flight procedures. His eagerness impressed them, though none suspected they were witnessing the early education of a future ace. His first airplane ride came at 17, courtesy of a local pilot who appreciated the boy's genuine interest in aviation. The experience confirmed what Francis had long suspected, that he belonged in the sky more than on the ground. The sensation of leaving Earth behind, of seeing familiar landscapes transformed into miniature maps below, felt like returning home after a long absence. When the pilot offered to let him take the controls, Francis's hands moved with natural confidence, as if he had been flying for years. College brought its own pressures. His parents hoped he would study engineering or business, pursuing the stable middle-class life they had sacrificed to make possible. Francis enrolled dutifully, but found lectures pale compared to the vivid reality of flight training. His grades remained adequate, though professors noticed his attention often seemed focused elsewhere. He was studying not for knowledge alone, but for advantage, learning what he needed to reach his true goal. The approach of global conflict added urgency to his plans. Radio broadcasts brought news of war spreading across Europe, of Poland crushed between German and Soviet armies. The stories struck Francis with personal force. These were his people suffering under foreign boots, his heritage being trampled by invaders. Abstract notions of duty suddenly became concrete obligations that demanded response. He entered a world where mistakes meant death. Francis's decision to join the Army Air Corps came despite his parents' fears and his professors' disappointment. They had hoped he would finish his degree first, perhaps pursue graduate studies. But Francis understood that history would not wait for his convenience. The war expanding across Europe demanded immediate action from those willing to fight. Basic training revealed both his strengths and limitations. Physical conditioning came easily, but the rigid military hierarchy chafed against his independent nature. Francis had grown accustomed to thinking for himself, making decisions based on personal judgment rather than following orders without question. His sergeants recognized talent, but worried about his tendency to improvise when strict adherence to protocol was expected. Flight training proved his natural element. While other cadets struggled with aircraft controls, Francis demonstrated an intuitive understanding of aerodynamics and machine behavior. His instructors noted exceptional spatial awareness and reaction times that placed him among the top percentile of trainees. More importantly, he showed no fear of pushing aircraft to their performance limits, a trait that could prove either invaluable or fatal depending on circumstances. His first solo flight marked a personal milestone that official records could not capture. Alone in the cockpit, surrounded by the familiar rhythm of engine noise and wind resistance, Francis finally felt complete. The sensation of controlling a powerful machine through three-dimensional space satisfied something deep within him that ground-based activities never could. He landed knowing that he had found his calling. Advanced training brought more complex aircraft and tactical instruction. Francis excelled at gunnery practice, his natural coordination translating into exceptional accuracy with aircraft weapons. His ability to track moving targets while maneuvering his own plane at high speeds impressed even veteran instructors. They began to recognize that they were training not just another pilot, but a potential warrior. The news of Pearl Harbor reached him during final training phases. The abstract war in Europe suddenly became America's fight, transforming Francis from a volunteer preparing for possible service into a combat pilot, preparing for certain battle. The attack galvanized his resolve and clarified his mission. He would fly against America's enemies, wherever that might lead him. For him, war ceased to be a map and became faces. Francis's initial assignment to the 56th Fighter Group placed him among pilots who would become legends, though none yet knew their destinies. The transition from training to combat readiness brought new pressures and the sobering reality that textbook maneuvers must now work against enemies determined to survive. His decision to volunteer for service with the Royal Air Force's Polish squadrons surprised his commanders, but revealed the depth of his personal commitment. Francis felt drawn to fight alongside men defending his ancestral homeland, even though it meant leaving familiar American units for unknown challenges with foreign allies. The choice demonstrated that his war had always been more than professional duty. It was personal mission rooted in family heritage. The journey to England opened his eyes to the global scope of the conflict. Crossing Atlantic waters where German submarines hunted Allied shipping, Francis understood for the first time how many people were risking everything to defeat fascism. His war was part of something much larger than individual achievement or national pride. It was a struggle for the future of human civilization. His arrival in Britain coincided with the height of the air war over Europe. The Polish squadrons had earned reputations as fierce fighters, men who flew with desperate courage born from watching their homeland destroyed. Francis found himself among pilots who had lost everything: families, homes, even their country's independence, yet continued fighting with undiminished resolve. Their example taught him that true warriors fight not for victory alone, but for principles that transcend personal survival. His first combat mission over occupied Europe marked his transformation from trained pilot to combat veteran. The reality of enemy fighters attempting to destroy him, of tracer bullets passing close enough to hear their passage, stripped away any remaining romantic notions about aerial warfare. This was not sport or demonstration of skill. It was lethal contest where mistakes brought death and success meant ending other human lives. The face of his first aerial victory would haunt his memory long after the war ended. The German pilot he shot down was probably someone's son, perhaps a father himself, certainly a skilled aviator who had trained as hard as Francis to master his deadly craft. Victory brought no celebration, only the sober recognition that survival in this environment required accepting the burden of taking lives. Francis learned to carry this weight without letting it paralyze his effectiveness in battle. The Polish pilots accepted him slowly, testing his courage and commitment before granting full membership in their brotherhood. They had seen too many foreign volunteers who sought glory without understanding sacrifice. But Francis proved himself through actions rather than words, flying the most dangerous missions and sharing the risks that bound these men together. His heritage helped, but his character earned their respect. Even his enemies later admitted this was a masterpiece of aerial combat. Francis's return to American service brought assignment to missions that would test every skill he had developed. The 56th Fighter Group was tasked with escorting bomber formations deep into German territory, a mission that guaranteed encounters with the Luftwaffe's most experienced pilots, flying their most advanced aircraft. His first engagement against German aces revealed the deadly sophistication of his opponents. These were not the enthusiastic but inexperienced pilots America had faced in the Pacific theater, but veterans hardened by years of combat over Europe and Russia. They flew with the precision of surgeons and the ruthlessness of executioners, exploiting every advantage their superior aircraft and accumulated experience provided. The Focke-Wulf 190 proved a formidable adversary, its heavy armament and robust construction making it dangerous to approach carelessly. Francis learned to respect his enemy's equipment while identifying its limitations. His P-47 Thunderbolt might lack the German fighter's initial acceleration, but it could absorb tremendous damage and maintain performance at high altitudes, where many enemy aircraft struggled. Each combat encounter became a chess match played at 400 miles per hour, with moves and counter-moves executed in seconds that determined life or death. Francis developed tactics that used his aircraft's strengths while avoiding situations that favored enemy advantages. He learned to fight vertically when possible, using his plane's superior high-altitude performance to dictate engagement terms. His growing reputation among both Allied and German pilots created a psychological dimension to combat that went beyond mechanical performance. Enemy pilots who recognized his aircraft markings knew they faced a dangerous opponent, sometimes leading them to avoid engagement or fight more cautiously. This reputation became both advantage and burden. Enemies concentrated their efforts on destroying him, making every mission a personal duel. The mental strain of constant combat began affecting all pilots, but Francis seemed to thrive under pressure that broke others. His ability to remain calm during the chaos of aerial battle, to make split-second tactical decisions while under fire, set him apart from even experienced combat veterans. Squadron mates began depending on his leadership and tactical insight, trusting his judgment in situations where mistakes meant death for entire formations. Summer of 1944 brought the most intense air battles Francis had ever experienced. The Allied invasion of Normandy required massive air support, placing unprecedented demands on fighter pilots. Francis flew multiple missions daily, engaging German interceptors who grew increasingly desperate as their homeland came under direct attack. Each combat tested his skills against enemies who knew they were fighting for their nation's survival. This mission was never meant to be possible. By mid-1944, Francis had achieved the status every fighter pilot dreamed of. He was the highest-scoring American ace in the European theater, his name known to both Allied commanders and German intelligence officers. 28 confirmed aerial victories made him a legend among his peers and a target for enemy fighters seeking to claim credit for shooting down America's premier ace. His aircraft bore the scars of countless engagements, bullet holes patched with aluminum plates, paint worn away by the stress of high-speed maneuvering, engine components replaced after battle damage. Yet the P-47 continued performing with the reliability that made it beloved among pilots who depended on their machines for survival. Francis had developed an almost supernatural bond with his aircraft, understanding its capabilities and limitations better than he knew his own body. The mission that would change everything began like dozens of others. Allied intelligence had identified a German airfield that posed threats to upcoming operations. Francis volunteered to lead a ground attack mission, though such low-level strikes were among the most dangerous assignments pilots could accept. Flying at treetop height made aircraft vulnerable to ground fire while eliminating the altitude advantage that had served Francis so well in air-to-air combat. The target appeared exactly where intelligence had promised. German aircraft lined up in neat rows, presenting tempting targets for strafing runs. Francis led his formation in at maximum speed, machine guns chattering as bullets tore through parked enemy planes. The attack achieved complete surprise, destroying valuable aircraft and equipment. But success bred overconfidence that would prove costly. Against his better judgment, Francis decided to make a second pass over the target. Perhaps he was motivated by the sight of so many enemy aircraft still intact, or maybe the adrenaline of successful attack clouded his tactical thinking. Whatever the reason, he turned his flight around for another strafing run, despite the cardinal rule that surprise attacks should never be repeated against the same target. German anti-aircraft crews had used the brief respite to man their weapons and adjust their aim. As Francis dove toward the airfield again, tracer fire rose to meet him like deadly fireworks. His P-47 flew directly into the concentrated fire of multiple gun positions, taking hits that damaged critical systems. The engine began losing power, oil pressure dropped, and control surfaces responded sluggishly to his inputs. With his aircraft crippled and German territory stretching in all directions, Francis faced the pilot's ultimate nightmare. He could attempt to reach Allied lines, knowing his damaged plane might not make the distance, or accept the inevitable and look for a place to crash land behind enemy lines. His decision came quickly. He would try to save his aircraft and possibly his freedom by nursing the wounded Thunderbolt toward home. The attempt lasted only minutes. With the engine failing completely and altitude bleeding away rapidly, Francis had no choice but to put the plane down in a German field. The crash landing he survived, but his war as a combat pilot had ended. After 28 aerial victories and countless successful missions, America's leading European ace found himself a prisoner of the enemy he had fought so effectively. Learning to obey proved harder than learning to command. The German prisoner of war camp, where Francis found himself, represented a different kind of combat. One where survival depended on maintaining dignity while accepting powerlessness. For a man accustomed to controlling his destiny through skill and courage, the enforced passivity of captivity presented challenges unlike any he had faced in aerial warfare. His reputation preceded him even into captivity. German officers knew they had captured America's leading ace, and some displayed the professional respect that warriors sometimes show worthy opponents. This recognition proved both blessing and curse. While it earned him certain considerations, it also made him a valuable propaganda prize that his captors were determined to exploit. The other prisoners included men from many nations and military services, each bringing their own skills and experiences to the collective challenge of survival. Francis found himself among bomber crews he had once escorted, men whose lives he had helped save through his fighter missions. The reunion was bittersweet. They were grateful for his past protection, but all now shared the same uncertain fate. Camp life demanded new skills and different forms of courage. Physical bravery meant little when survival depended on patience, cunning, and the ability to maintain hope despite circumstances that seemed hopeless. Francis watched some men break under the psychological pressure, while others found strength they never knew they possessed. He determined to be among the latter group. The months passed slowly, marked by inadequate food, harsh weather, and the constant uncertainty about when or whether the war would end. News filtered in through various channels, much of it contradictory or deliberately misleading. Francis and his fellow prisoners learned to read between the lines, searching for genuine information about the war's progress while filtering out German propaganda. Liberation came suddenly in the spring of 1945, as Allied armies swept across Germany and prison camps were abandoned or overrun. For Francis, freedom brought mixed emotions. Joy at regaining liberty was tempered by the realization that he had missed the war's final months. The climactic battles that concluded the European conflict he had fought so hard to win. His return to America was triumphant, but complicated. The public welcomed him as a genuine hero, but Francis struggled with the transition from combat pilot to peacetime citizen. The skills that had made him supreme in aerial warfare seemed less relevant in a world returning to civilian concerns. He found himself mourning not just lost comrades, but the intense purposefulness that had defined his existence during wartime. His career began where others ended theirs. The peacetime Air Force offered Francis opportunities to serve in various capacities, but nothing matched the intensity and clarity of combat flying. He accepted assignments in training and administration, sharing his expertise with a new generation of pilots who would never face the specific challenges that had forged his reputation. The outbreak of war in Korea in 1950 presented Francis with an unexpected opportunity to return to combat. Despite his age and senior rank, he volunteered for assignment to the Korean theater, where jet aircraft and different tactical situations would test his abilities in new ways. The transition from propeller-driven fighters to jets required learning new skills, but his fundamental understanding of aerial warfare remained valid. Korea proved different from the European War in many ways. The enemy pilots were often inexperienced, but they flew more advanced aircraft that presented new challenges. The political limitations placed on the conflict frustrated many American pilots who were accustomed to fighting for clear victory rather than limited objectives. Francis adapted to these constraints while maintaining his effectiveness as a combat pilot. His first jet combat victories demonstrated that his skills had not diminished with age or changed circumstances. Flying the F-86 Sabre, Francis quickly added to his victory total, proving that the instincts and tactical understanding that had made him supreme in propeller aircraft translated effectively to the jet age. He became one of the few pilots to achieve ace status in 2 different wars. The Korean conflict also allowed Francis to serve in leadership roles that had been beyond his rank during World War II. His combat experience and proven judgment made him valuable not just as a pilot, but as a commander who could guide other airmen through the challenges of aerial warfare. He found satisfaction in this broader responsibility, though individual combat victories remained his greatest source of pride. His second war ended with the Korean armistice, leaving Francis once again to adjust to peacetime service. But this time, the transition proved easier. He had proven to himself and others that his abilities extended beyond the specific circumstances of World War II. His career in the Air Force continued for many more years, marked by various assignments and growing responsibilities that utilized his experience and expertise. His family never understood his craving for risk, but he lived with it from the start. Marriage brought new dimensions to Francis's life, introducing considerations and responsibilities that complicated his single-minded focus on military aviation. His wife understood that she had married not just a man, but a legend, with all the challenges that such a relationship entailed. Children added another layer of complexity to Francis's existence. How does a man famous for dealing death from the skies explain his profession to young minds? His son and daughters grew up knowing their father was a hero to many people, but they also saw him as simply the man who helped with homework and attended school events when military duties permitted. The demands of military service often kept Francis away from home for extended periods. Training exercises, overseas assignments, and the general requirements of Air Force life meant that his family learned to function without his constant presence. This separation was particularly difficult during his children's formative years, when they needed stability and guidance that his career sometimes prevented him from providing. His personality away from the cockpit surprised those who expected a larger-than-life character to match his reputation. Francis was actually quite reserved in social situations, more comfortable with small groups of close friends than with the public attention his fame attracted. He rarely spoke about his combat experiences unless directly asked, and even then his accounts were typically modest and understated. The psychological impact of combat service affected Francis in ways that were not immediately apparent. Like many veterans of intense warfare, he carried memories and experiences that civilian life could never fully understand or accommodate. The bonds formed with fellow combat pilots remained stronger than most peacetime relationships, creating a fraternity of shared experience that outsiders found difficult to penetrate. His approach to risk in civilian life reflected lessons learned in combat. Francis understood the difference between necessary risks and unnecessary gambles, having seen too many good pilots die because they confused courage with recklessness. This wisdom served him well in peacetime activities, where he enjoyed various pursuits without the compulsive risk-taking that affected some former combat pilots. Too reckless for a rookie, too dangerous for his enemies. Francis's capture during his final World War II mission sparked debates that continued long after the war ended. Some critics suggested that his decision to make a second strafing pass against the German airfield represented exactly the kind of overconfidence that combat experience was supposed to prevent. Others defended his choice as a reasonable tactical decision that simply encountered bad luck. The question of whether Francis's extensive combat experience had made him too aggressive for his own good became a subject of military analysis. His record of 28 aerial victories was achieved through calculated risks that pushed the boundaries of tactical wisdom. Some observers wondered whether his success had created a sense of invincibility that ultimately led to his downfall. His relationships with superior officers throughout his career generated various interpretations. Francis was known for speaking his mind about tactical and strategic issues, sometimes challenging decisions made by commanders who lacked his combat experience. This outspokenness earned him respect from some quarters, while creating tensions with others who valued conventional military hierarchy. The accuracy of his victory claims became subject to the same scrutiny that affected most World War II aces. The chaos of aerial combat made precise confirmation difficult, and some historians questioned whether all of his credited victories met the strict standards of evidence that modern analysis would require. Francis himself rarely discussed these controversies, accepting that such debates were inevitable given the nature of aerial warfare. His influence on American fighter tactics generated both praise and criticism. Supporters credited him with innovations that saved many Allied pilots' lives, while critics suggested that his aggressive approach encouraged dangerous behavior among less experienced aviators. The truth probably lay somewhere between these extremes, as is often the case with controversial historical figures. Personal relationships within the military community revealed Francis as a complex character who inspired strong reactions, both positive and negative. Some colleagues described him as a natural leader whose combat wisdom was invaluable to younger pilots. Others found him difficult to work with, a prima donna who expected special treatment because of his reputation. These conflicting assessments suggest a personality that did not fit easily into conventional military categories. His name was written in blood across European skies, yet the Francis Gabreski who returned from war bore little resemblance to the legend that had grown around his exploits. The transition from combat hero to peacetime officer revealed aspects of his character that aerial victories alone could never illuminate. His post-war career demonstrated that true leadership extended far beyond individual achievement in battle. The tactics Francis developed during World War II influenced fighter pilot training for decades after the conflict ended. His emphasis on teamwork, situational awareness, and aggressive but calculated risk-taking became standard doctrine for American fighter pilots. Military academies still study his combat methods as examples of effective aerial warfare, though modern technology has changed many of the specific circumstances he faced. His role in bridging the gap between propeller and jet aircraft proved historically significant. Francis was among the first generation of pilots who successfully made the transition from World War II fighters to jet aircraft, demonstrating that fundamental flying skills transcended technological changes. His experience in both the European and Korean conflicts provided valuable insights into the evolution of aerial warfare. The broader impact of his career on American military culture extended beyond tactical innovations. Francis represented a type of warrior that America needed during its emergence as a global superpower: skilled, courageous, but also thoughtful about the application of military force. His example influenced concepts of professional military service that shaped the modern Air Force. His Polish heritage added another dimension to his historical significance. Francis served as a bridge between Polish-American communities and the broader American military establishment, demonstrating that ethnic Americans could serve their adopted country with distinction while maintaining pride in their ancestral heritage. This example proved particularly important during the Cold War period, when ethnic loyalties sometimes came under suspicion. The lasting image of Francis Gabreski in popular culture tends to emphasize his combat achievements while minimizing the more complex aspects of his personality and career. This simplified portrait serves certain purposes, but fails to capture the full reality of a man who struggled with the same challenges that face all individuals attempting to find meaning and purpose in peacetime after experiencing the intense clarity of combat. The quiet moments between battles often revealed more about Francis's character than his most famous victories. Fellow pilots remembered him as a man who took time to counsel younger aviators, sharing hard-won wisdom about survival in aerial combat. His advice was practical rather than inspiring. Check your equipment twice, never fly alone if you can avoid it, and remember that dead heroes help no one. His relationship with aircraft mechanics demonstrated respect for the men whose work kept him alive. Francis understood that pilot skill meant nothing if the aircraft failed mechanically, and he cultivated relationships with ground crews that went beyond normal military protocol. These friendships often proved crucial when quick repairs or modifications could mean the difference between successful missions and disaster. The poker games that occupied many off-duty hours became legendary among his squadron mates. Francis played with the same calculated aggression that characterized his flying, reading opponents' weaknesses and exploiting them without mercy. His winnings were often substantial, but he was known for his generosity toward pilots who had suffered losses, both in gambling and in combat. His correspondence with family during the war revealed a man torn between duty and homesickness. Letters home spoke of missing simple pleasures: his mother's cooking, Pennsylvania seasons, the sound of church bells on Sunday mornings. These personal touches humanized the warrior whose public image emphasized only strength and determination. The nightmares that plagued many combat veterans affected Francis as well, though he rarely discussed them openly. Fellow officers occasionally witnessed his struggles with sleep, the sudden starts and quiet distress that marked those who had seen too much violence. His coping mechanisms included long, solitary walks and intensive physical exercise that helped burn off nervous energy. His collection of enemy artifacts told its own story about the personal cost of victory. German equipment recovered from crashed aircraft, maps marked with targets he had attacked, photographs of destroyed installations. These souvenirs served as reminders of battles won and enemies defeated, but they also represented human lives ended and dreams destroyed. Francis kept them not as trophies, but as remembrances of war's true price. The Medal of Honor recommendation that was never approved became a source of quiet controversy among those who knew the details of his service. Some believed that his capture, regardless of the circumstances, disqualified him from the nation's highest military decoration. Others argued that his overall record of service and sacrifice merited recognition despite the unfortunate end to his European combat tour. His influence on Polish-American communities extended far beyond military circles. Francis became a symbol of successful assimilation, proof that immigrants and their children could achieve the highest levels of accomplishment while maintaining their ethnic identity. Veterans organizations and cultural societies sought his participation in events that celebrated both Polish heritage and American patriotism. The flying lessons he gave to his son years after the war ended provided glimpses into his teaching methods and personal philosophy. Unlike his military instruction, these sessions emphasized safety and careful judgment over aggressive tactics. Francis wanted his son to understand the joy of flight without inheriting the warrior's burden that had shaped his own relationship with aviation. His final years brought recognition that had been delayed by the complexities of his military career. Awards and honors accumulated as historians gained perspective on World War II and Korea, acknowledging contributions that had been overshadowed by more dramatic or politically convenient narratives. Francis accepted these tributes graciously, but without the enthusiasm that might have been expected from someone receiving long overdue recognition. The man who had once commanded the skies over Europe spent his retirement quietly, tending his garden and reading histories of the conflicts he had helped win. Visitors often expressed surprise at finding such a humble and soft-spoken individual where they expected to meet a larger-than-life hero. Francis would smile at their confusion, understanding that legends serve purposes that real people cannot always fulfill. His death marked the end of an era, the passing of a generation that had faced the ultimate test of their civilization and emerged victorious. The funeral drew mourners from across the military community and beyond, men and women whose lives had been touched by his example or protected by his service. They came to honor not just the ace pilot or the war hero, but the man who had carried his burdens with dignity and served his country with distinction across multiple decades. The legacy Francis Gabreski left behind transcends simple accounting of aerial victories or military decorations. His life demonstrated that heroism consists not of single dramatic moments, but of consistent choices to place duty above personal interest, to maintain integrity under pressure, and to serve causes larger than individual ambition. These qualities, rather than his combat record, constitute his most enduring contribution to American military tradition and the broader culture it serves. In the end, Francis Gabreski's story illustrates the complex relationship between individual achievement and historical circumstance. He was the right man in the right place at the right time, possessing skills and character traits that proved perfectly suited to the challenges his era presented. Yet he was also something more universal, an example of how ordinary people can rise to extraordinary circumstances when their deepest values are tested by the pressures of history. The skies over Europe and Korea no longer echo with the sound of his aircraft, but the principles he embodied continue to influence those who follow in his path. In military academies and flight schools, in veterans' halls and family gatherings, the name Francis Gabreski represents ideals that transcend the specific conflicts he fought. His life reminds us that heroism is not about seeking glory, but about doing what must be done, regardless of personal cost, when the stakes are highest and the outcome most uncertain. This mission was written in blood, yet no official record would ever acknowledge its existence. Beyond the celebrated victories and documented missions lay a shadow world of operations that military censors deemed too sensitive for public knowledge. Francis participated in activities that required absolute secrecy, missions where failure meant not just personal death, but potential compromise of broader Allied strategies. The rescue operations he flew with Polish squadrons never appeared in after-action reports. Allied pilots shot down over occupied territory faced capture, interrogation, and possible execution if their identities were discovered. Francis volunteered for these dangerous missions, flying modified aircraft stripped of armament to carry additional fuel for deep penetration flights behind enemy lines. The operations required split-second timing, precise navigation, and nerves that could withstand landing in hostile territory while under fire. One particular rescue mission in late 1943 took Francis deeper into German-controlled France than any official operation had attempted. The pilot they were retrieving possessed knowledge of new Allied radar systems that could not be allowed to fall into enemy hands. Francis flew alone, his P-47 configured for maximum range, following coordinates provided by French resistance fighters whose reliability was uncertain at best. The pickup point was a small field near Reims, surrounded by German patrol routes and observation posts. Francis arrived at the designated time to find the field empty, except for what appeared to be a maintenance vehicle at one end. His training screamed warnings about potential traps, but the mission parameters left no room for extended reconnaissance. He had to land, collect his passenger, and depart within a matter of minutes to avoid detection. The landing went smoothly, but the figure who ran toward his aircraft was not the Allied pilot he expected. Instead, a young French woman approached, carrying information about German aircraft production facilities that intelligence analysts later described as invaluable. She had been waiting for 3 days, living in a barn and surviving on scraps, determined to reach Allied forces with data that could save hundreds of bomber crews' lives. Francis made the decision to take her, despite the deviation from his orders. The flight back to England tested his aircraft's range limits and his own endurance, as German fighters scrambled to intercept the unknown aircraft crossing their territory. They reached the English coast with fuel tanks nearly empty and enemy pursuers still visible on the horizon. The woman's information proved accurate and led to successful strikes against previously unknown targets. Reconnaissance flights over German industrial areas required different skills than fighter combat. Francis flew these missions at extreme altitudes, his aircraft specially modified with cameras and extended fuel tanks. The work was tedious and dangerous, requiring hours of straight flight over enemy territory while maintaining precise courses and altitudes for optimal photography. Anti-aircraft fire was constant, and German interceptors were always a threat. One reconnaissance mission in early 1944 took him over the Ruhr Valley industrial complex, where German war production was concentrated. Francis flew at 40,000 feet, above the effective range of most anti-aircraft weapons, but still vulnerable to the newest German fighters designed for high-altitude interception. The mission required photographing specific facilities while maintaining radio silence and avoiding engagement with enemy aircraft. The intelligence gathered during these flights helped Allied planners identify the most critical targets for bombing campaigns. Francis saw firsthand the massive scale of German industrial capacity, the sprawling factories and transportation networks that kept the Nazi war machine functioning. These images later proved crucial in planning the strategic bombing campaign that helped cripple German production capabilities. Intelligence-gathering operations with Polish units often involved more than simple photography. Francis participated in missions designed to insert agents into occupied Poland, dangerous flights that required precise navigation to small landing sites while avoiding both German and Soviet forces. The political complexities of these operations meant that official records were deliberately vague or non-existent. The agents he transported carried communication equipment, weapons, and instructions for resistance networks operating behind enemy lines. Some were Polish officers attempting to return to their homeland. Others were intelligence specialists, trained to gather information about German military capabilities. Francis never learned the ultimate fate of most of these passengers, though he suspected that many died attempting to complete their missions. Weather reconnaissance flights pushed both pilot and aircraft to their absolute limits. Francis flew into storm systems that would ground commercial aviation for days, gathering meteorological data that Allied planners needed for timing major operations. These flights required exceptional skill in instrument navigation and aircraft handling under extreme conditions. The data collected during these missions proved crucial for planning the D-Day invasion and other major Allied operations. Weather conditions could determine the success or failure of amphibious landings, airborne operations, and strategic bombing missions. Francis understood that his willingness to fly in impossible conditions contributed directly to saving thousands of Allied lives by ensuring optimal timing for critical operations. His personal tragedy turned into his strategy, but some enemies earned respect that transcended national boundaries. The end of World War II brought unexpected opportunities for Francis to meet the German pilots who had once tried to destroy him. These encounters revealed the complex humanity that existed even in the midst of total warfare. The first such meeting occurred in 1948, during a NATO conference where former enemies gathered to discuss the emerging threat from the Soviet Union. Francis found himself sharing dinner with Hauptmann Klaus Weber, a Luftwaffe ace who had flown against American bombers during the same period when Francis was escorting them. Their conversation began cautiously, but soon evolved into detailed technical discussions about aircraft performance and combat tactics. Weber described the desperate conditions under which German pilots had operated during the war's final years. Fuel shortages meant reduced training for new pilots. Aircraft maintenance suffered from lack of spare parts, and the constant pressure of Allied bombing campaigns left German squadrons operating under impossible circumstances. Francis gained new appreciation for the skill and courage his enemies had displayed while fighting against overwhelming odds. The German pilots' account of their encounters differed significantly from Francis's memories of the same battles. Weber remembered the American P-47s as nearly invulnerable opponents whose pilots seemed to possess unlimited ammunition and fuel. He described the frustration of engaging bombers escorted by fighters that could outrun, outgun, and outlast anything the Luftwaffe could field by 1944. Their discussion revealed the mutual respect that professional warriors develop for worthy opponents. Weber acknowledged that Francis's tactics had been particularly effective against German interceptors, forcing them to fight on terms that favored American aircraft and pilot training. Francis, in turn, admitted that German pilots like Weber had pushed him to develop new techniques and maintain constant vigilance during combat missions. The conversation eventually turned to their shared experiences of combat stress and loss. Both men had lost close friends to enemy action, watched comrades die in aircraft mishaps, and struggled with the psychological burden of surviving when others did not. These common experiences created bonds that transcended the political differences that had once made them enemies. Weber later collaborated with Francis on historical studies of World War II aerial combat. Their joint analysis of specific battles provided insights that neither could have achieved alone, combining American and German perspectives to create more complete understanding of the air war over Europe. This cooperation became a model for similar projects involving other former enemies. The relationship between Francis and former Luftwaffe pilot Johann Steinhoff proved even more significant. Steinhoff had been one of Germany's leading aces, a skilled tactician who had developed innovative fighter techniques during the war. Their post-war collaboration helped shape NATO's approach to air defense during the early Cold War period. Steinhoff's expertise in jet aircraft proved particularly valuable as the Western alliance struggled to match Soviet technological advances. His experience with the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter, provided insights that helped American designers improve their own jet aircraft. Francis served as liaison between German technical experts and American military planners, facilitating knowledge transfer that strengthened Allied capabilities. The personal friendship between Francis and several former German pilots illustrated the broader reconciliation between former enemies that characterized post-war Europe. These men had tried to kill each other during the war, but they recognized that the emerging Soviet threat required cooperation between Western nations, regardless of past conflicts. Joint training exercises in the 1950s brought Francis into regular contact with pilots from many former enemy nations. Italian, German, and even some former Hungarian pilots now flew alongside Americans in NATO formations, sharing tactics and techniques that had once been jealously guarded military secrets. Francis found these collaborations professionally rewarding and personally meaningful. The exchange of technical information benefited all participants. German pilots shared their experience with jet propulsion and rocket-powered aircraft. Americans contributed their expertise in radar systems and electronic warfare, while British pilots offered insights into night fighting techniques and weather operations. This pooling of knowledge accelerated the development of effective air defense systems for Western Europe. Some encounters with former enemies proved more challenging than others. Francis met several German pilots who remained bitter about their nation's defeat and resentful of their current subordinate status within the Western Alliance. These men had difficulty accepting cooperation with former enemies, preferring to dwell on past grievances rather than focus on present necessities. The international community of military pilots that emerged during the Cold War created bonds that survived political changes and personal differences. Francis maintained correspondence with former enemies throughout his life, sharing family news and professional updates with men who had once been determined to destroy him. These relationships demonstrated aviation's unique ability to create brotherhood among those who shared its dangers and rewards.